In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars burned like ancient lanterns and nebulae painted the void with colors no human eye could truly comprehend, there existed a realm that defied both time and space. This was the dominion of the Zytherians, an advanced civilization whose mastery over interstellar travel and quantum manipulation had elevated them to near-mythic status among the galaxy's myriad species. Their empire stretched across hundreds of star systems, connected by intricate networks of wormholes and stabilized by technology so sophisticated it seemed almost magical to lesser beings. At the heart of this galactic empire stood their capital planet, Xylora Prime, a world that pulsed with bioluminescent forests and crystalline mountains that refracted light into cascading rainbows. The atmosphere itself shimmered with microscopic particles that created an ever-present aurora, casting everything in an ethereal glow. Here, beneath the iridescent sky, rose the celestial spire, a towering structure that pierced through the clouds, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light that told stories older than most civilizations. Within this magnificent edifice resided the Zytherian Queen, a being whose very presence commanded reverence from all who approached her court. Her chamber, located at the pinnacle of the celestial spire, was a masterpiece of living architecture. Walls composed of semi-sentient crystal formations responded to her emotions, pulsing with gentle hues that reflected her mood. The air was thick with the sweet scent of nectar-like vapor, produced by symbiotic plant life that thrived in her presence. Massive windows offered panoramic views of the galaxy beyond, while gravity manipulation fields allowed her to float gracefully above the floor, surrounded by an entourage of advisors and attendants. The Queen herself was a vision that transcended conventional beauty. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, her form was both alien and mesmerizing. Her skin shimmered with opalescent scales that shifted colors with each subtle movement, while her elongated limbs ended in delicate, webbed digits. Most striking were her eyes, enormous orbs that dominated her face, filled with countless irises that swirled independently, capable of perceiving multiple dimensions simultaneously. A crown of living energy floated above her head, constantly reshaping itself into intricate patterns that represented her thoughts and emotions. Her power extended far beyond mere physical presence. As the genetic repository of her entire species, she possessed telepathic abilities that allowed her to communicate instantly with any member of her race across the galaxy. Her mind served as a nexus for their collective consciousness, making her decisions felt throughout their vast empire. Yet despite her immense authority, she ruled with wisdom born from millennia of experience, balancing progress with preservation, expansion with responsibility. The current queen, known simply as Sovereign 17 in their numeric-based naming system, had recently ascended to the throne following the ceremonial metamorphosis that marked the end of each monarch's reign. She was young by Zytherian standards, her scales still retaining the vibrant luster of youth, and her energy fields crackled with barely contained vitality. Unlike her predecessors, who had maintained strict isolationist policies, Sovereign 17 harbored a deep curiosity about the other intelligent species scattered throughout the galaxy. This fascination would soon lead to an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her place in the universe. The day began like any other in the celestial spire, with the Queen presiding over matters of state from her floating throne. Her advisors presented holographic projections of various planetary developments, their voices blending into a harmonious symphony of reports and recommendations. The Queen listened attentively, her multiple irises processing information faster than any organic computer. Yet something felt different today, a subtle vibration in the fabric of space-time that even her most sensitive instruments couldn't quite detect. It started as a faint ripple in her consciousness, like the first brush of wind against still water. The Queen paused mid-decision, her energy crown flickering momentarily. "Silence," she commanded, her voice resonating through the chamber with crystalline clarity. The assembled court immediately ceased their presentations, their bodies instinctively lowering in deference to their monarch's command. Through the massive observation windows, something extraordinary was unfolding. Space itself seemed to be folding inward, creating a vortex of impossible geometry. The Queen's advisors scrambled to analyze the phenomenon, their tentacles manipulating complex control interfaces, but their readings made little sense. Before anyone could react, a brilliant flash illuminated the chamber, forcing even the Queen to shield her sensitive eyes. When the light subsided, a small vessel hung suspended in the void outside the spire. Its design was unlike anything in the Zytherian database, a sleek, metallic craft bearing markings that suggested primitive yet determined engineering. The Queen's interest sharpened as her sensors detected a single life form aboard, its biological signature completely foreign to their records. "Bring it inside," she ordered, her voice tinged with both caution and excitement. The docking procedures were initiated, and within moments, the human vessel was secured in one of the spire's reception chambers. The Queen descended from her throne, her attendants forming a protective circle around her as they moved toward the designated meeting area. As the airlock hissed open, revealing the interior of the human craft, the Queen found herself holding her breath, a reflex more psychological than physiological. The figure that emerged was unlike anything she had imagined. He stood upright on two legs, his body covered in simple clothing that emphasized rather than concealed his form. His skin was a warm, golden-brown hue, and his features were strikingly symmetrical. But it was his eyes, those singular expressive orbs, that captured her attention completely. The human's gaze met hers, and for the first time in her long existence, the Queen experienced a sensation she couldn't immediately categorize. Her energy crown flared brightly, and she felt her scales shift to a deep crimson, a reaction that shocked both her and her court. The human, apparently unfazed by his surroundings, took a cautious step forward, his lips curving into what the Queen's cultural databases identified as a smile. "Hello," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that transcended language barriers. The Queen's translation matrix automatically processed his words, but it was the underlying tone, rich with curiosity and courage, that truly resonated with her. She realized with growing astonishment that her normally precise thoughts had become uncharacteristically scattered, her usual composure replaced by an unfamiliar fluttering sensation in her core. The human's presence seemed to fill the chamber, not through physical dominance but through sheer force of personality. Each movement he made appeared deliberate yet natural, his posture conveying both strength and vulnerability. The Queen noticed how his eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with genuine wonder, before returning to meet her gaze with unwavering directness. As the Queen studied the human more closely, her analytical mind struggled to reconcile what she observed with her species' understanding of evolutionary biology. His proportions seemed almost mathematically perfect, his movements flowing with an efficiency that spoke of careful design rather than random mutation. The way his chest rose and fell with each breath created a rhythm that seemed to resonate with some deep, forgotten part of her consciousness. Her court watched in stunned silence as their sovereign, usually the epitome of collected grace, found herself unconsciously leaning forward, drawn to this strange creature like metal to magnet. The human's apparent lack of fear in the presence of arguably the most powerful being in the galaxy only added to his mystique. When he raised a hand in what appeared to be a gesture of peace, the Queen felt her own appendages twitch in response, an involuntary movement that would have been considered highly improper under any other circumstances. The Queen's immediate reaction to the human's presence sent ripples through her consciousness that manifested physically in ways that startled even her most trusted advisors. Her opalescent scales, which typically shifted through a controlled spectrum of diplomatic blues and authoritative purples during official meetings, now danced uncontrollably through shades of crimson and gold, colors associated with Zytherian courtship displays. Her energy crown, usually maintaining a steady, regal configuration, began to pulse erratically, sending out waves of bioluminescent sparks that illuminated the chamber in unpredictable bursts. These visible manifestations were merely external indicators of the profound internal turmoil she was experiencing. The Queen's normally hyper-efficient neural pathways felt congested, as if her thoughts were colliding with each other in their rush to process this unprecedented situation. Her multiple irises, capable of independent focus and analysis, found themselves inexplicably drawn to follow the human's every movement in perfect synchronization, a phenomenon that had never occurred in her entire existence. Her respiratory membranes, which regulated her body's interaction with the nutrient-rich atmosphere, began to function erratically. Instead of the smooth, rhythmic exchanges characteristic of Zytherian physiology, she found herself taking rapid, shallow breaths, a behavior more reminiscent of primitive species during moments of acute stress or excitement. The attending healers, sensing their sovereign's distress, moved to approach her, but she waved them away with an uncharacteristic sharpness that caused several of them to recoil in shock. Most disturbing of all was the effect on her telepathic abilities. The Queen's mind, accustomed to effortlessly navigating the collective consciousness of her species, now felt muddled and disoriented. Attempting to reach out to her advisors resulted in fragmented thoughts and incomplete images, as if her mental signals were being refracted through some invisible barrier. When she tried to access the shared memories of previous encounters with alien species, She found her thoughts instead circling back to the human standing before her, analyzing every detail of his appearance and mannerisms with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Her courtiers exchanged concerned glances as they witnessed their sovereign's unusual behavior. The queen's normally graceful movements became hesitant and jerky, as if her body was struggling to maintain basic motor control. Several times, she reached out toward the human with her webbed digits, only to quickly withdraw them, her actions betraying an uncertainty that was completely foreign to her nature. The crystalline walls of the chamber responded to her emotional state by pulsing with increasingly erratic patterns, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that reflected her inner turmoil. Despite her best efforts to maintain her royal composure, the queen found herself unable to prevent these physical manifestations of her reaction. Her scales continued their chaotic dance of colors, her energy crown persisted in its wild fluctuations, and her body betrayed signs of agitation that grew more pronounced with each passing moment. The human, seemingly unaware of the profound impact he was having, continued to stand calmly before her, his expression one of polite curiosity mixed with cautious respect. As the initial shock of the human's presence began to settle, the queen found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions that challenged everything she had learned about interspecies interactions. Her extensive education in xenobiology and diplomacy had prepared her for many scenarios, but nothing could have readied her for the visceral reaction she was experiencing. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong, that a queen should maintain absolute control and detachment. Yet her instincts pushed her toward responses that defied her training. She attempted to rationalize her reaction through scientific analysis, mentally cataloging every aspect of the human's physiology and behavior. His bipedal stance, while inefficient compared to her species' quadrupedal locomotion, carried an elegance that intrigued her. The way his chest expanded with each breath, though primitive in its necessity for atmospheric oxygen, created a rhythm that somehow resonated with her own biological functions. Even his simple clothing, which revealed much of his form while maintaining modesty, struck her as both practical and aesthetically pleasing in ways that defied logical explanation. The queen's mind raced through centuries of recorded encounters with other species, searching for parallels that might help her understand her reaction. She recalled the formal audiences with the insectoid Vorthakians, where discussions had been conducted with clinical precision, the trade negotiations with the aquatic Neridians, marked by careful consideration of mutual benefits, even the tense first contact with a warlike Kragther empire, handled with strategic calculation. None of these experiences had elicited even a fraction of the intense response she was currently struggling to contain. Her thoughts turned to her species' historical perspective on humans, gleaned from distant observations and intercepted communications. They had always been classified as a minor species, their technological capabilities deemed primitive and their social structures chaotic. Yet standing before her now was a representative of that species who embodied qualities that contradicted every preconceived notion in her database. His confidence in the face of overwhelming superiority, his apparent ease in an alien environment, and his ability to project warmth and sincerity without speaking. These traits combined to create an impression that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The queen's analytical mind clashed with her instinctual responses as she tried to categorize her feelings. Was this a biological imperative triggered by some unknown pheromone? A psychological reaction to encountering a truly unique individual? Or perhaps something more fundamental, a recognition of qualities that transcended species boundaries? Each possibility led to more questions, creating a feedback loop of introspection that threatened to overwhelm her carefully cultivated mental discipline. Her courtiers, sensing their sovereign's internal struggle, maintained a respectful distance while continuing to observe with growing concern. The queen knew she should be focusing on protocol, on establishing formal diplomatic relations and determining the human's purpose for entering Zytherian space. Instead, she found herself fixated on minute details, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the subtle shift in his weight when he changed position, the confident yet non-threatening way he held himself in an environment that should have been utterly alien and terrifying. This internal conflict manifested in her decision-making processes, causing her to hesitate where she should have acted decisively. When her chief advisor projected a holographic display of potential quarantine protocols, she found herself dismissing it without proper consideration. When the security minister suggested scanning the human for weapons, she countermanded the order with uncharacteristic abruptness. Each deviation from standard procedure created ripples of tension throughout the court, as centuries of established protocol were cast aside in favor of impulses she couldn't fully explain. The queen's struggle reached a crescendo as she realized that her reaction wasn't merely physical or intellectual. It was fundamentally altering her perception of what it meant to be sovereign. The rigid boundaries between ruler and subject, between observer and observed, were blurring in ways that challenged the very foundation of Zytherian society. For the first time in her existence, she questioned whether absolute control and emotional detachment were truly the hallmarks of effective leadership, or if perhaps there was value in allowing oneself to be affected by the unexpected. As the Queen grappled with her unprecedented reaction to the human visitor, the implications of this encounter began to reverberate through the intricate social hierarchy of Zytherian society. Her courtiers, who had spent their entire lives adhering to strict protocols of conduct and emotion regulation, found themselves equally affected by the human's presence. Several high-ranking diplomats, known for their stoic demeanor during interstellar negotiations, were observed exchanging nervous glances and subtle color shifts in their scales, a clear indication of emotional disturbance. The normally precise movements of her honor guard became slightly erratic, their weapon appendages twitching in ways that would have been considered unacceptable during any other diplomatic event. The Queen's closest advisors, particularly those responsible for interspecies relations, found their carefully constructed frameworks of understanding crumbling before their eyes. Lady Silthera, the Minister of First Contact Protocols, discovered that her meticulously organized database of species classifications refused to properly categorize the human's characteristics. Each attempt to file him under existing parameters resulted in system errors and contradictory data streams. Lord Vexler, the chief xenobiologist, reported that his laboratory equipment was producing anomalous readings whenever the human was nearby, suggesting some form of interference that defied known scientific principles. Throughout the celestial spire, the effects spread like ripples in a pond. In the lower levels, where junior functionaries and maintenance personnel went about their duties, whispers of the human's arrival began to circulate. Workers who had never set foot in the royal chambers suddenly found themselves discussing theories about the visitor's significance, their conversations marked by an unusual level of speculation and excitement. The crystalline communication network that connected all levels of Zytherian society buzzed with unprecedented activity as individuals sought to share their impressions and interpretations of the unfolding events. Even the spire's living architecture responded to the disruption in established order. The sentient crystal formations that lined the corridors began to pulse with irregular patterns, their usual harmonious rhythms giving way to complex, evolving designs that seemed to mirror the collective uncertainty spreading through the population. Gravity fields fluctuated subtly, causing objects to drift in unexpected directions, while the ambient nectar vapor took on new, unpredictable scents that hinted at the emotional turbulence affecting the inhabitants. The Queen's own family members, including her designated successors and genetic repositories, found themselves questioning long-held beliefs about leadership and emotional control. Young Princess Thrynia, next in line for the throne, openly expressed fascination with the human's apparent ability to inspire such strong reactions without resorting to traditional displays of power or authority. Her comments sparked heated debates among the royal lineage about the nature of influence and the potential value of emotional authenticity in governance. Perhaps most significantly, the Queen's telepathic connection to her people revealed a startling truth. Her own confusion and attraction were being echoed, albeit in muted forms, throughout the population. The collective consciousness that she had always relied upon for stability and unity now pulsed with questions and uncertainties. Many Zytherians found themselves revisiting their own experiences with other species, wondering if they too had suppressed similar reactions in the name of maintaining proper decorum and racial superiority. The implications extended beyond mere social disruption. Military leaders began reconsidering their strategies for dealing with less advanced civilizations, questioning whether their traditional approach of overwhelming technological superiority might be missing crucial elements of successful interaction. Economic ministers found themselves re-evaluating trade agreements and resource allocation policies, considering whether their rigid adherence to efficiency metrics had overlooked valuable opportunities for cultural exchange and mutual growth. As these realizations spread through Zytherian society, a subtle but significant shift began to occur. The rigid caste system that had defined their civilization for millennia showed signs of softening, with individuals from different social strata engaging in unprecedented cross-level discussions about the nature of their species' place in the galaxy. Scientific institutions redirected research efforts to study not just the technical aspects of other species, but also the emotional and cultural dimensions of interspecies relationships. The Queen observed these changes with a mixture of apprehension and hope. While the disruption to established order was undeniable, she recognized that this moment of chaos might represent an opportunity for her people to evolve beyond their self-imposed limitations. The human's presence had acted as a catalyst, forcing Zytherian society to confront fundamental questions about identity, interaction, and the true nature of progress. As she continued to struggle with her own reactions, she realized that the answers to these questions might lie not in suppressing their responses, but in embracing and understanding them. As the initial shock of the humans' arrival began to settle into a more sustained presence within the celestial spire, the Queen found herself adapting to a new reality that defied all precedent in Zytherian history. Daily court proceedings, once characterized by their precise choreography and ritualistic formality, now carried an undercurrent of anticipation that rippled through every interaction. The human, whom she had come to know as Captain Elias Varn, had been granted quarters in the upper levels of the spire, a decision that had sparked intense debate among her council but which she had insisted upon with uncharacteristic determination. Their encounters evolved into a delicate dance of cultural exchange and personal discovery. During formal audiences, Captain Varn demonstrated an uncanny ability to navigate Zytherian protocols with a combination of respectful adherence and gentle humor that disarmed even the most rigid traditionalists. He learned to interpret the subtle color shifts in their scales, responding appropriately to emotional cues that most visitors would have missed entirely. In turn, he shared insights about human customs and values, explaining concepts like individual freedom and emotional expression in ways that challenged Zytherian sensibilities while sparking intense philosophical discussions. The Queen found herself increasingly drawn to these sessions, often extending them well beyond their scheduled duration. She discovered that Captain Varn possessed a depth of knowledge about stellar phenomena and quantum mechanics that rivaled her own scientist's understanding, though framed through a distinctly human perspective that emphasized creative problem-solving over pure efficiency. Their conversations ranged from theoretical physics to artistic expression, with the human demonstrating an ability to connect seemingly disparate concepts in ways that illuminated new possibilities for both their species. Yet it was during the informal moments between official meetings that the most profound changes occurred. The Queen began taking meals in Captain Varn's company, a practice unheard of in Zytherian tradition. These intimate gatherings allowed her to observe his species' eating habits, the way he savored flavors, the social rituals surrounding shared food, and to introduce him to Zytherian nutritional practices. She found particular delight in watching his reactions to their nutrient-rich vapors, which he described as tasting like liquid rainbows, a phrase that sent her translators into temporary confusion but which she came to understand as a compliment of the highest order. Their physical proximity during these times revealed subtle adjustments in both their behaviors. The Queen noticed that she had begun to modify her floating height to better align with his eye level, while Captain Varn naturally adjusted his posture to accommodate her preferred spatial orientation. They developed a system of non-verbal communication that bridged their species' differences. Slight tilts of his head corresponding to specific color shifts in her scales, gestures of his hands mirroring the movements of her webbed digits. The human's presence also influenced the Queen's daily routines in unexpected ways. She found herself deviating from her usual meditation patterns to join him in what he called stargazing sessions, where they would sit together in the spire's observation deck, watching the galaxy spin in silence. These quiet moments allowed her to experience the cosmos through his eyes, not as a realm to be conquered or studied, but as a source of wonder and inspiration. She began incorporating elements of human art and music into her private chambers, discovering that their emotional resonance complemented the crystalline harmonics of Zytherian compositions in surprising ways. Their relationship evolved into a complex tapestry of teacher and student roles that shifted depending on the context. Captain Varn taught her about human history, emphasizing the value of learning from past mistakes and celebrating achievements born from diversity and cooperation. In return, she introduced him to Zytherian concepts of collective consciousness and multidimensional thinking, watching with fascination as he adapted these ideas to human cognitive frameworks. Their discussions often lasted late into the night cycle, with neither seeming to notice the passage of time until reminded by concerned attendants. The Queen's court observed these developments with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. Traditionalists whispered about the erosion of proper protocol, while younger members of the aristocracy began emulating aspects of human behavior they found appealing. Some courtiers started experimenting with more expressive scale patterns during social gatherings, while others attempted to replicate Captain Varn's casual gestures of friendship. The Queen noted these changes with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing that her personal evolution was catalyzing broader social transformation. As their relationship deepened, the Queen found herself facing increasingly complex challenges in maintaining the balance between her role as sovereign and her growing connection to Captain Varn. Official functions required her to maintain a certain distance, Yet she discovered that her presence at these events was noticeably altered by her experiences with the human. Her speeches carried more emotional weight. Her diplomatic decisions incorporated more nuanced considerations of individual perspectives, and her interactions with foreign dignitaries displayed a newfound flexibility that puzzled many seasoned observers. The Queen's transformation extended beyond mere behavioral changes. It began to affect her fundamental approach to leadership. She started implementing reforms that would have been unthinkable months earlier, establishing new protocols for interspecies contact that emphasized mutual understanding over technological superiority. Her court watched in amazement as she integrated human concepts of empathy and compassion into Zytherian policymaking, creating hybrid approaches to governance that drew from the strengths of both species. Captain Varn, for his part, proved remarkably adept at navigating the complex political landscape of the celestial spire. He formed genuine connections with members of the court, helping them bridge the gap between their traditional values and the new perspectives he represented. His ability to find common ground between seemingly incompatible viewpoints earned him respect even among the most conservative factions, while his willingness to learn and adapt won him friends throughout the hierarchy. Their evolving relationship became a living experiment in interspecies cooperation, with each interaction adding new layers of complexity to their understanding of each other. The Queen discovered that her initial attraction to Captain Varn had transformed into something deeper and more profound, a recognition of shared values and aspirations that transcended their physical and cultural differences. Together, they were forging a new path that promised to reshape not just their personal lives, but potentially the future of both their species. As weeks turned into months, the Queen found herself increasingly torn between her duty to her people and the profound connection she had formed with Captain Varn. Each morning, as she prepared for her royal duties, she felt the weight of expectation pressing down upon her. The traditionalists among her court had grown more vocal in their disapproval, organizing secret councils to discuss the perceived threat to Zytherian purity and authority. Their arguments, delivered through carefully worded petitions and encoded messages, painted a picture of a civilization teetering on the brink of cultural dilution, with a human's presence serving as the catalyst for dangerous change. Yet the Queen could not ignore the positive transformations occurring throughout her empire. Young Zytherians, inspired by Captain Varn's example, were pushing boundaries in unprecedented ways. Artists began incorporating human themes into their crystalline compositions, creating works that resonated with deeper emotional undertones than traditional pieces. Scientists reported breakthroughs in fields previously considered stagnant, attributing their success to the human's unique approach to problem-solving. Even the military, long resistant to change, had begun exploring new strategies that balanced technological superiority with diplomatic finesse. The Queen's private moments with Captain Varn had become her sanctuary, a space where she could shed the constraints of protocol and simply exist as herself. They had developed a language of their own, combining Zytherian energy patterns with human gestures and expressions. During these times, she felt more complete than she ever had in her role as sovereign. Captain Varn's presence awakened parts of her consciousness that had lain dormant, challenging her to embrace aspects of her nature that Zytherian society had long suppressed in favor of efficiency and control. But with this awakening came increasing pressure. The Council of Elders, guardians of Zytherian tradition, demanded a formal declaration regarding the human status. Should he be classified as a diplomatic envoy, a scientific specimen, or something else entirely? Each option carried profound implications for future interspecies relations. Meanwhile, Captain Varn's own people remained largely unaware of his situation, their primitive communication systems unable to penetrate the sophisticated shielding around the celestial spire. The Queen wrestled with the ethical implications of keeping him isolated from his species, knowing that revealing his location could trigger a chain reaction of events neither of them might be prepared to handle. Their physical proximity during these private moments had become both a source of comfort and tension. The Queen found herself drawn to Captain Varn's warmth, his solid presence offering a stability that contrasted beautifully with her own ethereal nature. Yet each touch, each shared glance, carried the weight of potential consequences. Her energy crown now responded to his proximity with predictable patterns, creating beautiful but potentially compromising displays of light that her attendants carefully noted in their records. The situation reached a critical point when the Queen discovered she was developing new abilities, or perhaps rediscovering ancient ones. Her telepathic range had expanded beyond anything recorded in Zytherian history, allowing her to perceive emotions and intentions with unprecedented clarity. At first, she attributed this to her deepening connection with Captain Varn, but soon realized that other Zytherians were experiencing similar enhancements. The collective consciousness of her species was evolving, becoming more attuned to emotional frequencies that had previously been filtered out as unnecessary noise. This evolution brought both promise and peril. The Queen watched as her people began forming deeper bonds with each other, their interactions becoming richer and more meaningful. But she also saw the potential for chaos as long-suppressed emotions surfaced, threatening to disrupt the carefully maintained order of Zytherian society. Traditional power structures were beginning to shift, with younger generations demanding greater autonomy and emotional expression. The very foundations of her empire were trembling under the weight of this transformation. Captain Varn, sensing the gravity of the situation, proposed a radical solution. Drawing from human history, he suggested establishing a council of diverse voices, including representatives from all levels of Zytherian society and, eventually, other species. This idea, while revolutionary, resonated with the Queen's growing belief that true progress required embracing complexity rather than suppressing it. Yet implementing such a plan would require confronting powerful forces within her own government who viewed any deviation from established norms as a threat to their authority. Their discussions about the future grew more intense, often lasting through multiple sleep cycles. The Queen found herself questioning fundamental aspects of Zytherian philosophy, the emphasis on perfection through control, the suppression of individual desires for the sake of collective harmony. Captain Varn's presence had become a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and weaknesses of her civilization in ways that demanded action. Each decision she made, each path she chose, carried implications that would echo through generations of both their species. As they stood together in the observation deck, watching the galaxy spin in its eternal dance, the Queen realized that their story was becoming something far greater than a simple interspecies romance. It had evolved into a crucible where two civilizations were being forged anew, their fates intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated. The choices they made in the coming days would determine not just their personal futures, but potentially the direction of galactic civilization itself. The Queen made her decision, announcing a new era of interspecies cooperation and emotional openness, with Captain Varn as its ambassador. Together, they formed the Galactic Unity Council, blending Zytherian efficiency with human creativity. Traditionalists resisted, but the younger generation embraced change, ushering in a cultural renaissance. The Queen's energy crown now pulsed with harmonious patterns, symbolizing balance between logic and emotion. Captain Varn's presence became a bridge between worlds, inspiring alliances across star systems. Their bond deepened, transcending species boundaries to become a beacon of unity. The celestial spire transformed into a hub for interstellar collaboration, its crystalline walls glowing brighter than ever. Both humans and Zytherians flourished, learning from each other's strengths. As the galaxy watched, hope replaced fear, proving that love could rewrite even cosmic destinies. And so, under shimmering auroras, two hearts, one alien, one human, forged a legacy of peace that would echo through eternity.